around debt. And the reason why this, and I'm challenging even those who are responsible in government to speak about it clearly, because part of this communication is important. You collect revenues of around 2.4 trillion shillings. You use over 1.2 trillion in paying interest rates of debt incurred. So that's 50% that you can do nothing about. Basically what we are doing as a country, the money we are borrowing in terms of PFM Act, you should be borrowing for development alone. But even by doing the math, even with a pencil, if we take our revenue collection, you remove CFS, you remove salaries, you're already in red. It means the money we borrow, some of it is for budget support, and clearly that money is for recurrent. You don't need to go very far. Just this data, just do the math around this data, even with a pencil, you'll get the correct figure. So this issue of debt, if we are not progressive enough and prudent enough as a country, in just a few months to come, we will see the ramifications. We do not want Kenya to be a case study like Sri Lanka in the year 2002, in the year 2022, 2023. The primary reason was debt. The issue around Zambia never decided too much because there was a new president who had to tell their country as it is, and they restructured, or they started or attempted to restructure. Ghana never had that luxury. They actually defaulted. Now, if you receive 2 shillings and 1 shilling is already going into interest rates of debt incurred in terms of interest rate, and the other shilling remaining cannot pay even the recurrent expenditure, I mean, there is work to be done there. And I'm saying it so that we provoke our mind, we think, not with the aim of just talking, but also providing a solution to it. Therefore, you must have seen sometime last week, I saw the National Treasury had put up some communication which was recanted very fast about a visit to China. Visits to China currently or other bilaterals, I can assure you, will be about debt primarily. Because we are almost at a cliff in terms of debt repayment, and especially interest rate. The problem is that when you go to your creditors to discuss about either rescheduling debt or working around new terms, what are you telling the markets? When I am here, I have borrowed 3 of you some money, 10,000, 12,000, 18,000. I have your money now, so you expect me to pay you. You see, as my sister there, I've already called my brother here to tell him, you know, I was to pay you this money, but forgive me, you may have to add me a few more months for me to pay you this money. What am I already telling you? As the other person, I owe money. I've already called you as a person who owes you money. I mean, najaribu kuodoa economy kwa hii maneno mingi. Martin is here. Dirango is there. And Veronica. I owe, all of you have lent me money. Veronica 12,000, Dirango 10, and Martin 18,000. Yani, mumenikopesha. Munaelewa hiyo maneno? Niko hapa. Martin ako hapa, ameona nimeita Dirango. Nimemwambia, najua niko na pesa yako na nilikuwa nikulipe next month. Lakini sasa nataka tuongee. What comes to your mind as Veronica? Are you getting what I'm trying to say? Any talk you start around debt, changing terms, you already communicate to the markets. If you look at the figures, the yield of our Kenyan Eurobond, even as late as yesterday, you see changes there. because markets operate on credible and fundamental information. When the market starts sensing that somebody owes you money, you're already talking to them, not asking them which bank account they should pay you through, but asking you, can we, tunaweza fanya, unipe miezi kidogo, kiasi nini. When they start seeing you already giving signals to one of your creditors that you want changes in terms, you are already communicating signals to the market. And those signals in the market is actually how countries then decide. Because what usually happens when you give signals that you have problems with paying debt, the international market starts to sense you as somebody who may also change terms when they lend you money. So what do? They already input that risk in the interest rate they will charge you. That is why you see the yield of our Kenyan Eurobond is changing. Because when the creditors start seeing, you may start some stories sometime later in the future, they also price you accordingly. So they lend you money fine, but you also pay a commensurate cost for that. Now the other thing I want you to look at is this. You can talk to China and they agree. China, you know, people imagine China is the #1 lender to Kenya. No, that's not true. The Kenyan debt to Kenya, the Chinese debt to Kenya is actually less than 10%. It's only that Chinese debt is usually project finance, which is more expensive, and commercial. So they become more expensive. But there are some other parameters I provoke you to go and check. Out of our CFS, payments of interest rates of 1 trillion, approximately. 750 billion this current financial year. It is now over 800 billion. The one we budgeted was 750. I think it's now hovering around 800 billion by close of the year. But let me use 750. Please get this point. 1 trillion shillings is for payment of interest rate. 750 billion is for domestic debt servicing. So, external debt, we are talking about around 200 billion shillings. There is a point I want to derive there. Now, issues around talking about debt. You know, when I'm talking about debt, I'm talking about changing terms, because I am sure 100% we may end up there as a country. So when you talk about changing terms of debt, you may change externally. Now come now back home. 750 billion is the biggest ticket of payment of interest rate in our country, in our economy. Now, can you start thinking as a Kenyan what that is? Can you imagine a meeting being called by the National Treasury at some point? Like the way we are here, there is a meeting that has been convened. Nimewaita tuongee mambo ya hii deni. Sio kama wa Kenya, lakini wale watu wamekopesha serikali pesa. I want you to start seeing that conversation, what it means. The 750 billion Kenya shillings we are paying domestic interest rate is owed to who? Is owed to banks, is owed to insurance companies, is owed to bond holders, even normal Kenyans. Now, changing terms means what? Are you calling us to increase the yield? What is the likely conversation that is likely to be around there? It's about postponing paying you. That's number one. There can only be two things actually. Postponing paying you, that's number one, or paying you less. Now think about it this way. You are a bank with shareholders expecting you to release results by end of the financial year. Huyo mtu anasema nini akikuita hiyo mkutano, in other words? Those are the things that we need to think about, because the dominant thing we have to think about as a country is debt. And I can guarantee you, we can do all the other things correct. Any small indication that we are not able to service is catastrophic more than any other thing we are doing as a country. I think I leave that there. Mumeshika what I'm trying to say. And You know, they say restructuring is the first chapter of default. Because the same analogy I gave, if I owe you money, 3 of you, and I've called you one to talk, what are we talking about? We are talking about, I may not pay you next month, I'll pay you 3 months from now. So I'm restructuring. So what if in those 2 months I've not paid you, what have I done? Haven't I defaulted? Now, lastly, I want to talk about revenue. There is something called revenue maximizing tax rate. That is a term that should be given a department in the Department of the National Treasury. Revenue maximizing tax rate. You know, many times we confuse that you add tax rate, you get more revenue. It is a fallacy. At some point you get to rough as curve and it starts descending. That the more you increase, the more you distort economic decisions. So if I was to buy a car, I see you've already paying for my money, so I hold back that expenditure. Holding back that expenditure means even the retro you could have gotten, you'll not get it. That is something I have seen we have also to take very seriously as a country. So that even as we make tax policies and revenue policies, let's look, and it cannot be arbitrary. I mean, you cannot just sit down and say, now tunapeleka hii kodi hapa, you get more money. There has to be some research based on it. There has to be some thorough analysis based on it. There has to be thorough sampling. There has to be thorough work in it by coming up with a rate that maximizes revenue without making people distort their economic decisions or market to distort its decision making. We did the finance bill of 2023, which was fairly debated as the one for last year. Now, this is the most shocking thing. The Kenyan revenue to GDP ratio in the year 2023-2024 was around 16%. I want you to see the trend. In the year 2019-2020 was around 15%. In the year 2023, that year, was 14 point something percent. In this current year, up to date, it is around 14.7%. Now, when you do robust revenue raising measures in terms of policy, they should come with commensurate revenue from it. Kodi ikiongezewa, for example, pay, there should be commensurate revenue in the basket of revenue from this money you have taxed. Tunashikana hapo. Why is it that even when you raise the rate, then in the basket of money, there is not that money? Why is it that the revenue growth in Kenya never noticed finance bill of 2023? That the graph, if you are given a graph without labeling, you will not pinpoint those 2 years. You will not see them. Because the revenue never changed other than the ordinary changes it usually has. I'm talking about that analysis of revenue maximizing tax rate. Why is it that even when we have a very corrosive, when we have a very debatable policy around tax and it passes, why is it that we cannot see this money in the other side? Possibly this could be the reason. You come, maybe you are earning some money here, the government takes it at the payee level. Napenda kuita unakatia stima kwa transformer. You know, when money is deducted from your payee, ni kama stima imekatiwa kwa transformer. So it actually never reaches your hands. Now, when you cut money from the payee level, when you cut money at that level, let's say in my disposable income, you already knock off 8,000 shillings from it. That is the money you are sending your uncle somewhere in Nyamira. That is the money you are sending your auntie somewhere in Kisii. Now, you no longer send them that money. So they no longer buy that sugar they were buying through the transfer you are doing. So you have cut money here at the payee level, but the same money denies you correction at the VAT level. Those are some of the things we have to work around, so that even as we increase taxes, then we are not handicapping the same revenue collection. There is another thing I want to talk about very briefly, which you have to be vigilant as a country. In Nigeria is one of the economies, by the way, which are very good. It has very rich people in terms of, in Africa, you only get black billionaires, majority of them being domiciled in Lagos, Nigeria, out of Nigerian money. Now, Dangote cement, BOA cement, they grew around what? You come and put in some duty for imports of the commodities they manufacture, primarily cement. By that time, when you put duty on cement, I'm using Nigeria, you end up having a big conglomerate and several of them. Number one, of course, we know Dangote cement, BOA cement, there is also Lafarge and the others. So now you cut off imports. It's a good thing, fine. The question is, for how long? You cutting off meaning you build a wall of tariff, not necessarily a non-tariff barrier, but a tariff one. So you put in a wall. This wall should incentivize this local production to be efficient, so that their products can compete with the global ones. But then you overstay with that policy. So Nigeria, by beginning of this year, had the highest cement prices in Africa. Can you see that oxymoron? The biggest producers had the highest cement prices in Africa and had the highest cement margins almost in the world. You protect an industry that must come in with an analysis for how long, and there should be government follow-up on, when we protect you, up to when can Kenyans continue to pay more for you to get efficient? Because I am here as a consumer in Kenya. The cement prices in Kenya today have gone up. So what am I doing as a Kenyan buyer of cement? I am actually subsidizing as a Kenyan the production of the producer of cement. I am paying a higher price. It is a good thing. It may end up employing many more Kenyans. But the reason for protectionism must not be for longevity of production in this company. It should be up to the point where this company gets competitiveness in competing with any other cement from any other country. If I can import cement, let's say from Mozambique, I'm just using an abstract example, or from South Africa. If I can import a bag of cement from South Africa and it gets to Taita Taveta at a lower price than the cement being produced several kilometers away from that place, I mean, that's also a paradox. Protectionism all along must not be for the benefit of the producer. It must be for the benefit of the economy. And that is why it has to be time-bound. Very lastly, some of the things I think we should do as a country. Number one is to take institutional reforms very seriously. If you look at the regression of economic growth from China, from all the other countries, institutional reforms takes up a sizable influence on the dynamics of economic growth. Sio kupaka mafuta. You know, in Kenya we come rebrand an agency and we call it institutional reform. We need to be very deliberate. Institutional reform must incorporate the size of government. Kenya can act optimally with half of the government we have in terms of its size. We can cut the government into half across everything. government, if government is a loaf of bread, you can cut it by half. All the resources of government, you can cut it by half, and my grandmother will not notice. What am I trying to say? That service delivery will not be hampered. Institutional reform must be deliberate and must be objective. The other thing, the Eurobond we borrowed, for example, the one I talked about, 10% to retire the 6.8%, we borrowed alone 30% higher price to pay another one. I wish we did a few things instead of borrowing more. Kenya has got assets. And some of these assets, we bought them for commercial purpose alone. Government invests in institutions for many factors, strategic reasons. There is also commercial reasons. In the year 2020, Safaricom market capitalization was around 1.5 trillion Kenya shillings. 1.5 trillion. The government of Kenya owns 35% of Safaricom. 20% of that Safaricom at the market cap then of 1.5 trillion is 300 billion. Only 30% alone. You could have raised 300 billion without borrowing anything. But some people will argue, but you know, why would you sell it? It gets dividend. I mean, even in the investment arena itself, you take the amount of money the government cumulatively has received in dividends. It may need to receive dividends for hundreds of years for it to match this kind of investment. The other thing people talk about, you can't sell a company like Safaricom. You know, it holds very strategic reasons for our country. Which strategic reasons cannot be handled? And that regulator can hold the forte of government there. You can even have a regulation that the government will have board of directors without necessarily even having a shareholding. You can have it. Just as currently the CBK forces banks, you must have independent directors. The government will not own your bank, but they'll force you. You have to have independent directors. Government can still control companies through regulation. You don't have to control companies through ownership and stake. Now, this is the thing. Now, that market capitalization of Safaricom has now come down from 1.5 trillion to 700 billion as of yesterday. We must be strategic even in government investments so that we make it, we have an efficient asset management arm of government so that they are able to make optimal decisions. Why would you go to borrow money as a government? Private sector investment. For you to invest, you are not hungry. You are okay. You are not maybe even Kenyan. So you have a home by the beach. You have money. I want to ask a rhetorical question. Between this person who has 10 billion shillings, them they are okay, they have a house, they are able to take care of themselves, but they have 10 billion, they want to invest in Kenya. Is this person doing Kenya a favor, or is it Kenya doing them a favor? You are fine. Wewe uko na gari yako, hata uko na ndege, unakaa ng'ambo, you are not even Kenyan. You live in the most exotic places and you have money and you want to invest. So you are not looking for money to buy food. You are actually looking for money just as a creation of wealth. And you have some money to put up a factory somewhere and you say to it is in Kenya. And when, or any other developing country, when you come in with this money and you are investing in Kenya, somebody want to treat you like helping you is a favor they are doing you. Entrepreneurs, if they are given the primacy of the role that should be given to them, they can do much of the work that the government already does. and therefore take up some more roles from government for government to concentrate on just a few. If you look at, for example, the R&D budget of Amazon, it is bigger, research and development, it's a big budget in developed countries. The R&D budget of Amazon is higher than the R&D budget for the entire Germany. Germany as a country has a lower R&D budget than Amazon as a country. Just imagine if Amazon was not there. The R&D budget of Meta, for example, and maybe only two tech companies in the US combined, is higher than the entire R&D budget of the government of the United States. What am I trying to say? There are some things that are already being funded by the private sector in that country where the government does not actually need to have that money in their fiscals. Because the ultimate result of R&D is research, is to do things more efficiently, is to do things better. If private sector is given enough resources, enough support, they can end up doing much more of what the government does. Asanteni sana.